So, who are you going to call when you need to recreate the bridge of the original Star Trek for a fantasy scene in an episode of Son of a Critch? Find out on this episode of Brio TV, the podcast. Well, a new year marks the return of several TV series, including a few from CBC. Among them is Son of a Critch, one of my favorites. And when I spoke with Mark Critch in December at CBC's winter media launch in Toronto, he told me about a special fantasy scene in the series' second episode this season. That airs January 16th, and it finds young Mark, played by Benjamin Evan Ainsworth, sitting in the captain's chair on the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. So how did this St. John's-based sitcom beam Ainsworth aboard the Enterprise? Some sort of digital effect, maybe? Or, I don't know, well, set phasers for stun. They actually rebuilt sections of the bridge from the 1966-69 NBC series. And who did they get to design it? None other than Mark Steele, an Ottawa-born production designer who, among his many other credits, has been responsible for much of the look of Star Trek Discovery. I've been on the set of that series, which shoots at a couple of Canada's largest stages at Pinewood in Toronto. You can actually stand on the floor of one mammoth stage and look way up at the underside of the USS Discovery. It's pretty cool. So let's boldly go and ask Mark himself to tell us the rest of the story behind recreating one of television's most iconic interiors. Congratulations on all your success in your career. Mark Critch was raving about your efforts on Son of a Critch, and it sounds fascinating. But let me just get started at the beginning. And I've been to the set of Discovery. I was a handful of press. We were walked through the set in season 1. And my God, it's so impressive to look up at a spaceship and then stand on the bridge and to sit in the captain's chair and everything else. So we'll get to that. But how did you get in this business?
Well, I was, I grew up in Ottawa and went to Ryerson in Toronto back in the day and studied radio and television arts and kind of, thought I was going to be a director maybe, but I didn't really know what that meant. I did some TV stuff like local community TV directing and stuff like that, but kind of got sidetracked into the art department by, basically looking for work after, finishing school. I had a friend that worked in set decorating and set dressing on shows in Toronto back then. And I kind of fell into it that way and worked my way through and, ended up at the CBC and kind of just, I think from another time, really, when you kind of did a few odds and ends and on working on sets. I remember going down to the CBC on Gerard to their HR and applied, to stage jobs, right? And when that structure was still there and kind of fell into the art department through the CBC, when there was one, there was a whole kind of apparatus there that you could kind of move from show to show and learn all sorts of things. And then it sort of fell apart around us, as we know, and it continues to struggle. But yeah, back in those days, it kind of everybody left to work out in the world. So I found myself working in, TV series and movies out in the world in Toronto. And
just to back up for a second, while you were at CBC, one of the things I used to go down with my son to tapings of the Air Farce, and used to love that to see an actual live show performed in front of an audience. Yeah. I always thought was really cool. That was quite a task to build and strike 7 or 8 sets for a show. Did you ever work on that series?
I did, actually. I worked on the pilot. The year of the farce when they decided to come from radio to TV and show their faces to Canada.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun. But I think I really cut my teeth on Kids in the Hall.
Oh, my goodness.
I'm dating myself now. But if you want to talk about live audiences and stage setting and resetting, swinging sets, that was a sort of an interesting kind of, you worked in all the medium, you did 16 mil film shoots, you did, VTR tape, pre-tapes, you did live audience stuff. It was like theater mixed with TV, mixed with film. And we did maybe, I don't know, 300 sets a season in varying kind of genres. And I remember that was 2 years really early in my career when I was really young. And it kind of gave me a big schooling.
And Mark, is it true? I never had the opportunity to sit in the audience for a Kids in the Hall show, but from what I've heard, that band played that theme song every single time.
Oh, the Shadow Men, yeah, it was great. It was very energizing. They would play we would have to do changeovers. The way the show ran, we did two nights a week, 2 shows per night, the same show twice, and then they would cut the best out of those things. So from whatever the curtain call would have been, right through like a runtime of about 90 minutes of. And we just kept it going like a live show. So whenever we needed to change a set, or the band would play these band breaks, and the band breaks would give us a chance to like roll in the scenery and roll out the scenery. So that would be our background music to working. And then they would, or they'd play a VTR, a pre-taped segment for the audience to capture the laughter. And we would have time to we'd have to be very quiet in those situations. So yeah, it was a real spectacle, kind of a rock and roll circus, really. It was a lot of fun.
I bet. Yeah. What were they? Shadowy Men in a
Shadowy Planet.
That's it. Oh my goodness. What a great name. And I know even Air Force had the ground crew. They had just a couple of guys from that other band that were, I always thought that should be part of the show. If you're watching that at home on TV, you should see those guys playing in between. Mm-hmm. I thought that was an element that they should have jumped on. So you worked at CBC, and then you started to work on some other shows, you were saying.
That's right. Well, I went to what they called Outside back then, and started working in like TV series and, things like Due South, and
wow.
Eventually, a lot of, this is like late 90s, early 2000s era of Toronto, which was, the American service work, as they called it. I did a lot of TV series, a lot of shows. I don't know where they ever were shown, and I wouldn't know what channel they were on, but, and then eventually I kind of moved into from set decorating, which was my kind of trade, I would say, that I learned working on the floor. I moved into art directing, and started doing art directing for kind of, out of town US designers and people that would come to Toronto to do projects. And then sort of through the grapevine and through contacts, one day I got a phone call to do Star Trek when I was coming. So that was sort of a moment.
Yeah, no kidding.
Back in 2016.
And so this is Discovery.
That was Discovery, yeah.
So just
I worked on that, yeah.
That's it's shot down in the that beautiful those sound stages down by the lake in Toronto.
Yeah,
Pinewood, and I think you've got a couple of those sound stages for that show, right? It's a mammoth show.
At the time, I think we might have been the biggest idea that ever tried to be sort of staged and mounted in the city, and we had, I think, 4 or 5 stages going at that time. Eventually, our footprint expanded quite quickly, and we had many shops. We had 3 shops in Toronto, 3 like construction scenic shops in Toronto, just because we needed all that space to generate it. Because the challenge obviously was that it was a show. At the early conception of the show, we weren't traveling to planets or anything. It was all on board,
right?
The ships and things. So you were kind of you were sealed into your world, your studios and your scenery. So it became quite an operation to expand, or swing sets, as they call it, as we say in the trade, which is, building sets for episodes and things. So there was a kind of a sort of an internal structure we had to create to make all of the scenery work for the schedule.
And were there set designers, folks who mentored you along the way that you learned from?
Yeah, well, I was sort of, I kind of had through osmosis, absorbed, I think, a lot of experiences over time and understood the process. But I think when I moved into the art department, I had worked with a designer as a decorator for a while. His name was Gord Barnes, and he was instrumental in sort of encouraging me to move into art directing. And then my sort of big moment in terms of exposure to the next tier was working on Star Trek I worked with a gentleman named Mark Worthington out of the U.S. and at that time the supervising art director, a gentleman named Todd Cherniowski, and both of those guys are top tier in terms of their resumes and even their current working. I mean, I think Mark did WandaVision and got an Emmy award for that recently, among many other nominations and accolades. Yeah. He's very, very talented designer and a very generous person in terms of his knowledge. So I was able to just sort of sit at the table with some very, very, very experienced people, and it sort of opened my mind and myself to the potential of the art department. And that was a great experience. And that was sort of a turning point for me in terms of the kinds of shows I was doing from now on, because from there I went on to do Umbrella Academy and Lock and Key for Netflix, and most recently The Boys. So I kind of got a sort of window and an opportunity into the way the sort of Hollywood level of things go,
Yeah, no kidding. Was there a particular sci-fi show that you worked on that made people think, hey, this guy, Mark, we need him for Discovery?
Well, it didn't really work that way. I think, Toronto has a network of, there's a kind of a marketplace for products and productions up in Toronto that, are brought in from the US studios. So, So I think through just more from my kind of connection with some of the local production people, I had been doing art directing for other bigger type shows. Like I did Heroes Reborn for CBS and some of the Sci-Fi Channel stuff. So I kind of had a bit of I had a sort of enough CV and enough reputation that people were trying to sort of find local art directors that could help put a big show like this together. So the original Star Trek structure was Mark and Todd in LA. And then there was two other art directors, myself and another art director named Josu Descartier, who's a working set designer now. And we were kind of tasked with assembling the Toronto crew while Todd and Mark were putting together the LA component. And we just kind of became this sort of hybrid sort of team of art, set designers, graphic designers, illustrators. And that sort of, I was part of that sort of management team. And I always sort of kind of I kind of say, like, I was sort of I was the art director, like driving the back end of the fire truck around the corner. Like I was trying to it was a big machine. We put together like about 40 people to do design work and internationally too, like people in Toronto and abroad. So it was a big exercise to assemble. And then through changes and attrition through the season, I ended up production designing an episode. Episode 6 of the first season was mine to design entirely. So it was a real interesting experience from just my exposure to the scale of something like that. As you say, the scale, this is the greatest TV franchise ever, right? I mean, so you must have guys from Paramount and the networks of the States over your shoulder all the time. If you design a phaser, there's probably 15 people who have to sign off, or am I wrong? Are you able to have carte blanche on anything? No, I mean that is part of the process, and I think one of the challenges I think with all the tiers of production is sort of kind of corralling and navigating the creative creative intention on all levels, right? And on a big show like Star Trek, absolutely, there were a lot of approval, a lot of entities, in the room and outside that had to be included in the development of what was essentially what is a 50-year-old cultural canon. You put in your lap, and
what an expression.
We kind of, I know that, in not getting into some of the sort of, I guess, sort of the politics of something like that, but there were certain challenges in terms of encouraging the intention of the studio, because oftentimes those big machines there's a lot of chiefs and a lot of heads to sort of rally. So a big part of the job was communication, developing a communication strategy around making sure people in enough timely way could be aware of what we were doing. And at some point with those kinds of shows too, is that it becomes the art department sort of drives the entire production, because it is so heavily, it's so intensively part of what the show is. Like, there was nothing on the shelf for that show that you could just go rent or hang on the wall.
Right.
Everything had to be designed and built custom. So at some point, a big part of the challenge was actually trying to kind of, like I say, sort of corral and focus the approval process so that we could move in a timely way.
Well, listen, it's a stunning show and a beautiful set. I just watching it as a viewer and also walking it, my God, you had elements, especially that first season, of like a giant cargo bay and, the transporter room and all in glass and all this, the rest of it. It was very, very cool. So must have been pretty exciting to pull all that stuff together.
It was really quite fascinating and exciting. I mean, we had, we had this kind of brief to sort of try to add another dimension to what was already kind of very heavily traveled paths. And so that sort of spurred a lot of creative energy to sort of figure out how to also manage the physical part in a way that was practical for a television series. So, we kind of tried to build a really kind of practical world. So we wouldn't need to be so reliant entirely on visual effects. And it was certainly for me an interesting moment in terms of reconciling, and I think for the industry too, is how do you insert, the audience's expectations in present day, which is quite, driven by big stuff, into a sort of TV schedule. So we were really trying hard to make a physical world that we could move quickly through and cover the season's material. And that was a really fun exercise too. How do you build a modular working ship,
Yeah. It must blow your mind having, started out with kids in the hall and air farce and gaffer tape and cardboard to suddenly be driving this $1 billion bus. I mean, it's a mind blow. So good for you.
Well, I had some time to work up to it,
I bet you'd have to. More with Mark Steele after this short break. Well, time once again to check in with our friend Emily Gagne at Hollywood Suite. Emily, Happy New Year. What do you got for us now?
Well, Bill, we're blasting off into 2024 with genre fare. We're talking sci-fi, we're talking horror, we're talking the freakiest and the most fun movies you can think of. Everything from Beetlejuice to Blade, we've got on our channels this month.
Wow, Blade scares me. What's the freakiest sci-fi film you've got, though?
Sci-fi, I mean, we've got 2001: A Space Odyssey. I don't know if that's the freakiest, but it's a classic. We've got Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But I really think if you want something weird and wonderful, we have this film called 976 Evil, which is directed by Freddy Krueger himself, Robert Englund.
Well, that's the number, 976 Evil. You can find it on Hollywood Suite. Emily, thanks for the tip.
Thanks, Bill.
And we're back with production designer Mark Steele. And did you ever get a chance to go down to LA to look at other Star Trek sets or Star Trek?
No, I didn't really have a chance to it was odd. It was kind of a weird thing. And again, so the Roddenberry sort of legacy of the family, there's a kind of a CBS, there's a sort of an archival, Paramount had this sort of archival stuff, which or this arm that was trying very hard to preserve or catalog the kind of legacy of the show. But oddly, I think it was also kind of a historical moment in terms of just how CBS and Paramount had managed the franchise. So I was sort of thinking, there must be a warehouse somewhere that we can just get all this stuff from. And oddly, there wasn't. And they were actually coming to us going, can you make sure that we get all your stuff? And I was like, so we started. That's
pretty flattering. That's pretty good.
Exactly. We started this sort of process of archiving that I think was sort of kind of crashing into the new technologies of, servers and streaming and keeping, files and file management. So I didn't actually physically ever go down there to kind of do that, but I did contribute to sort of some of the kind of archival stuff. And I was able to actually, I did have a moment with Michael Okuda is a famous graphic designer who designed all the Next Generation, screens, all that language,
Yeah.
And we had some time with him to sort of help maybe offer some insight into some of our kind of going forward, because we were also trying to manage the timelines of the season of the series. And so that was neat sort of touching base with him. And I touched base with Gene Roddenberry's grandson, who I think manages the archive, and
oh, wow.
And a bit of and actually one of our illustrators, John, I'm sorry, I forgot his name, but he worked on he worked on the original film back in the 70s.
My goodness.
And he was doing some of the concept work for the ship and for the visual effects stuff. And one day he phoned me and asked what my birth date was. And
really?
So he took our birth dates, a bunch of the art department art directors, and he created the call numbers for the Discovery to sort of include some of our birth dates.
Oh, that's cool. So what ship is yours?
I think that was on the Discovery.
Oh, nice.
It might have been or maybe the Shenzhou. I think he was trying to build a bunch of them for the different ships. So
that's fantastic. So what's the call numbers on the Discovery?
Oh, you're asking.
I'm asking you what your birthday is. It can't be that.
Well, exactly. This is not a Comic-Con convention. I'm not that
no,
prepared.
I'm not the guy to be asking either. Honestly, Discovery was the Star Trek series that I finally became a Star Trek fan. Like I'm old enough. I was back in a kid when the original was on the air, but I was watching Lost in Space. I just never really got into it. But I did get, because I'm a member of the Television Critics Association. So over the years, I've been on the set of a couple of shows, Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, and Generations, I think. What was the one with Bakula?
Voyager or no?
One of those.
No, I think that was Enterprise.
Enterprise. So, but I think it was Deep Space Nine. It was a show that it was still shot the old analog style, in that it didn't have high def 4K, And so when we toured the set, it was pointed out as we got to the bridge. They had a 2-story bridge, and there was printouts all over when the people were working that would show information.
Sure.
And when you're standing there and you got up close, some of them said stuff like, William Shatner is a big fat idiot. They planted some,
right.
And they were hilarious, like really, really quite funny. But you couldn't see it as a viewer until everything went high def, and then they had to stop doing that, right?
Yeah, well, Easter eggs. I know the franchise has all kinds of, there's some pretty damning and crazy documentaries about the different, like the Next Generation apparently was fraught with all sorts of behind the scenes chicanery. There's a what do they call it? Trouble on the Bridge. There's a documentary about the Next Generation season, how it was getting off the ground, which was cuckoo. And the Easter egg thing. Yeah, absolutely. I think what happened with Discovery, and we kind of hit that moment and kind of the golden age that we just sort of moved through with streaming. And I know that CBS was hoping to use it as their flagship to launch their streaming service. So there was a lot more. It was the sort of the collision of cinema and television and modern cinema. So everything we would build and do, we realized was going to be scrutinized. And we ran up against moments where, under the pressure of time, we were, not entirely, able to kind of lovingly caress every moment. But there were moments where I had to point out to producers and directors and cinematographers that this handle that we're turning is going to be iconic, and it's going to become scrutinized by thousands of online communities that have been waiting for the next evolution of this device that they have been tracking from the original series. Like there's a whole fan, there's a massive amount of fan material. There's the shipyards. There's a web databases and websites where people are cataloging every single Federation vessel. It's spec. And we found ourselves kind of in a moment of trying to go, oh shit, we're in. Oh, I can't say yes. We're by that.
That's fine.
But we're in the turbolift, and the turbolift has a screen, and this has nothing to do with the scene. Is about getting from A to B, but in the background is this screen, and we have to now explain a cross section of the ship that we haven't really even designed. We've just been designing the sets and the exteriors. So we would be thrust into these moments of having to really pay attention to details that we know that the sort of fan base are going to, and with the technology, with their televisions are going to pause and have a real hard look at what did we put on that screen.
Wow.
And is it respectful of the canon? Is it in the right timeline? Do we want to say something to the audience? Do we want to give them a little nod that we know what we're doing? Like we understand that where this technology started and where it's going. So there was between myself and my other colleague, Todd, and the prop designer, prop master, Mario, we were kind of very much the keepers of the canon in those moments. Like that button was square at this timeline, not round. And when you push it, this thing always happens. And if we want to not have that happen, we need to consult with the sort of the holy canon of the what the audience has generated as far as the backstory and the history of all these devices. Because if you watch the show, like it doesn't really go too deep into explaining how things work in any way that makes sense, except to really the big fans. And I think we were trying to be respectful of that. And sometimes we would try to throw a little nod out to, original series stuff. And, it was a lot of fun. There were many layers and many people involved in trying to kind of make it what it was. I was a bit nervous, when it started to drop, because I was worried about offending the diehard audience that exists. I really wanted to make sure nobody was upset with what we did.
Well, Mark, have you been to Comic-Con?
I've only been I was at the Fan Expo here. Okay. We did a thing about Discovery. We did a presentation.
And what was the reception like there? Did you encounter people who were, hey, why did you have a round button instead of a square? Or were they okay with everything?
No, actually, everybody was super nice. I was really, I'm not a public speaker, so I was a bit sweaty up on the podium with all these people sitting there while the hall filled up with like 350 odd people and I was immediately relaxed by the outpouring of enthusiasm and the sort of smiling faces that people were nodding and like so excited about seeing what was next. I mean, my contribution, I did a comparative from the first season of the first season or series, just to show how much of a footprint it took up at Desilu, which was, a tiny little stage in relation to our massive, you could fit like 5 original series in our lot.
Yeah.
So I just started explaining the evolution of how many people it takes and how far it's come,
Well, let's talk a bit about that and tell me how you came to this amazing story Mark Critch is telling me on Son of a Critch. So there's an episode coming up in this new season 3, and it's a fantasy scene that basically takes place aboard the original Starship Enterprise on the deck. And you, I understand, had to reimagine this for Son of a Critch, right?
Yeah, we did. We wanted to. The scene is sort of, the iconic tableau we've all seen. The point of view from the screen while Captain Kirk negotiates with a Romulan or whoever is on that screen. That's trying, that classic sort of arrangement. And
right.
So we also were. We didn't have a lot of space, so we had to kind of pick our best sort of tableau. We couldn't obviously build an entire bridge for the moment, but we were able to kind of, I think, focus on the iconic stuff. Building the chair, building the sort of console that Uhura always sat at. All those moments that we all remember. I think nostalgically, if we've been on the planet long enough, even not that long, it's always there. Everyone knows what that classic look is, with Kirk and, Bones comes down and stands beside him and, call over to Uhura and Spock calls in from his side. So we try to just create enough of the set to kind of get those moments in place. Nice. We all know where everybody sits. We know where engineering is and we know where communications are.
Now, Son of a Critch is produced out in St. John's. Mm-hmm. Did the set, was this built there or was it built in Toronto? Where did you?
Well, we built it there.
Okay, my goodness. So
there's some very, we had some very, very talented, creative craftspeople there, scenic artists and construction work, carpenters. And I think we were able to, get into some fun stuff. One thing happens on a show when something like this comes over the wire down to the shop floor and we have to, kind of all brainstorm how to do it. There's a collective enthusiasm because everybody immediately catches on to what this is and really wants to put their mark on it and give it some attention. So we had some really great input from all of our craftspeople, right down to the buttons on the on the captain's chair, like molding them and doing them out of acrylic, and everybody wanted to kind of give it as much love and attention as they could. So it really turned out well.
That is astounding. It must be like if you're a car buff working on a 65 Mustang or whatever the iconic a Model T. This is
sure. Absolutely.
And now, so are you art directing Son of a Critch throughout the year? What is your role on that show?
Well, I was the production designer for season 3.
Oh, okay.
And I had a working relationship. I'd actually I was an art director on a show called Republic of Doyle about 12 years ago.
Okay, so you're familiar with that studio in St. John's, yeah?
Absolutely, and I'm also familiar with some of the producer and executive producers, John Batcher and Alan Hocko, and
Take a Shot.
And so we'd had a working relationship in the past, so it was actually a nice little bit of a homecoming to come back out and work together again after some time had gone by and some kids had grown up and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I imagine. I've been a couple of times when Republic of Doyle was in production, other things, and any chance to get to the Mallard Cottage, I think.
Yeah, the Mallard. Got to make a reservation.
Oh, I bet. For 2025, probably.
Well, it's actually St. John's whole restaurant gastronomy scene has just blown up in the last while. It's amazing. It's so different from when I was there last. But Mallard has obviously been there for a long time. But they go to the Duke and gotta have their fish and night.
Oh yeah, it's an amazing time. And we'll be right back after these messages. Well, did you know that it was June Carter Cash who wrote one of Johnny Cash's biggest hits, Ring of Fire? That's just one of the things you'll learn watching June, streaming this month on Paramount Plus. June shines a spotlight on the history of country music and the Carter and Cash families. The 5-time Grammy Award-winning singer, actor, and author has opened for Elvis, appeared on screen with Robert Duvall and Jane Seymour, and as mentioned, was a damn fine songwriter. Featuring interviews with the woman herself, the film also includes sit-downs with her family, admirers, and friends, including Dolly Parton, Reese Witherspoon, and Willie Nelson. And remember, there's a mountain of premium entertainment for audiences of all ages on Paramount Plus. The second season of the compelling crime thriller Hidden Assets returns to Super Channel for its exclusive Canadian premiere on Sunday, February 11th at 9 p.m., with each episode also available on Super Channel On Demand. This Irish-Belgian-Canadian co-production is a must-watch for aficionados of crime thrillers. In Season 2 of this Super Channel original, Criminal Asset Bureau's new team lead Claire Wallace finds herself at odds with CTU's Christian de Jong over the Antwerp investigation. And speaking of hidden assets, Quebecer and Brio TV favorite Karine Vaness is among the Canadians on Season 2 of this drama. And remember, Super Channel, an all-Canadian service, is available via most cable providers across the country, as well as streaming live and on demand with Amazon Prime Video channels, Apple TV Plus, and the Roku platform in Canada. Let's beam back down for more from Mark Steele. It must be interesting on Son of a Critch because, I love this series. I think it's really entertaining and funny. And but the budgets compared to there's this giant Paramount Discovery show are apples and oranges, I would imagine. Is it more challenging to pull off all the things that you do on that show? Given the budget constraints?
Well, I think every show has a challenge of some kind, and I don't think really it's all a scale, really, it's a scale relationship. But the thing I find with a project like Critch, which for starters for me too, I love the writing, and I think it's so much heart, right? Mm-hmm. And when we don't have, a lot of sort of resources, the thing that I try to do is design for the sort of scripted beats and try to design for the shots, try to design for the moments in the scenes, which is entirely what we've done, for instance, for the flashback. In a sense, is that we've created a set that we know the language of how it was photographed, and part of making it correct for the audience was photographing it the way that it was photographed in the 60s, which would be on a 35mm lens, TV camera lighting. Wow. Our DOP was terrible with names, Jason Tan. Okay. And he understood the language, so we together collaborate to make a moment, right? And we put our resources in the moment, and that's sort of what you see. And if you don't create that access to the moment, it doesn't really exist anyway. You can build a giant bridge on the Discovery. There's parts of the Discovery you'll never have seen ever, you know? Yeah. Because it's a giant sandbox, and maybe some reason for another will be down at that end, but maybe not, and the moments as written don't necessarily always line up with all of the space. So on a smaller project like Critch, for me, the goal was to make sure that we could really frame the moments in a way that was supporting the story, but also helped, just make it a richer experience and look. And we did lots of little things like that,
But you're right. With Star Trek, my memory of it is the lighting and even the tilt of the camera is different than it is today. Like everything was a little stylized, maybe a little bit Batman influenced, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, that language is really the language of filmmaking and storytelling. Mm-hmm. And, we've over the years, over my career, I've watched the bigger ideas being sort of, in a way, sort of pushed into the process of television. And what I've sort of developed in my sort of experience was a way to kind of pack as much production value in front of the lens as possible with the resource I'm given by the budget. And over time, you have you develop a sense of what's important and what isn't. And on a big show, it's important to have the option to walk 360 around the bridge and look up, look down, look sideways, go through a door, go around a corner. On a smaller project, it's more important to get that 3 people in the frame in a way that we all recognize as the way that's shot, and make sure they can communicate and they can cut to their angles in a way that we all are familiar with. And that doesn't require, a 360 degree set. It requires an understanding of the language. Right. And you just apply that in scale,
You must, once you wrap that scene on coming up this season on Son of a Critch on the what is it, the flight deck? What do we call that where Captain Kirk's at?
Oh, the bridge.
The bridge. Yeah, so you must, wrap, cut, and then was there about an extra day for 100 crew members to sit in the chair and have the picture taken?
Well, I think, we were, we had a lot of sets in that one stage with the house and a couple other things that we'll see this season coming up. So it was there for a while. It was there for a while in the lead up, and it was there for a while afterward. I don't know how many people got their picture taken with it, but I'm sure everyone got their turn.
It was there for a while.
Chair is now. You'll have to ask Mark Critch. I thought it would look good in his TV basement there.
Yeah, I'm sure.
He's got a nice little rec room in his house, but maybe it's somewhere else. I don't know.
I bet it's in his den next to the Wurlitzer, right?
Maybe.
Yeah, I bet you that's what's happened. Yeah. Well, that's very cool. And, Son of a Critch is set in the mid-'80s. Is it extra fun to sort of work on a show that is set in that kind of a time frame for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always fun to explore another era, because I think another era brings an emotional tone right away, and it's always a bit of a challenge. I mean, I did Umbrella Academy. Season 2 was 1963. Wow. And I think we have as a human beings in this era, with the amount of media that we kind of consume, there's an audience, I think, that has never really ever lived in those times and has only ever viewed what those eras look like through the filters of reproduction through our films and television. So there's a kind of a moment where you can make a choice. Do you want to enhance a sort of an impression of the era and kind of lean into it and kind of lean into the best parts of that time and the most interesting parts of that time, and then represent that to the audience, because that those will give your audience kind of an immediate connection, even if they weren't there. So you get this sort of opportunity to really bring a whole other tone and a whole other storytelling that you may not always get in a contemporary show where you're recreating kind of the reality everyone's experienced.
Yeah, I love it. I mean,
that's a fun thing. It's storytelling, more opportunity for storytelling.
When you're in Benjamin's room there with his grandfather, and you see those posters on the wall, the Gwade Schuster and all this other stuff, it really brings me right back. I watched last night, there's a channel that shows old movies. It's not TCM, but they had just a documentary about streetcars in Toronto, and it must have been set around 1969. And I'd forgotten. I guess they've ripped up every last track. They don't really have streetcars anymore. They show the old red rockets with the line going to the wires, just driving around King Street and Queen and everything else. And my God, what was shocking to me was how much the city had changed in 55 years. But it brought me right back to that time. I could smell the electrical thing on those cars, and the old diesel, whatever the hell was going on in those old Red Rockets, the leather and the chairs, it really brought you back to see it in that sort of context and time. So you're right. When you're detailing, you're picking the right brown tones or whatever the heck was happening in 1986 or 7. It's really important, isn't it?
Well, I think it is in a way to, I mean, you're kind of trying to, again, you're telling the story, or adding to the story, right? So you can kind of, I think there are those of us that might remember that time, and those types of tones immediately kind of put you there. And I think the other fun part is the graphics that you mentioned. Doing graphic design which is part of my purview as a production designer. I have really talented people in my department that, we research these eras and we find, the imagery and the clearance, and we do the whole sort of legal search to make sure we produce things. But I think all of us, relate to that kind of graphic element as well, like those posters and, we have a thing this season about a telephone book, like, telephone books, sometimes it's a kind of a moment too, where you have to go back and excavate something that doesn't exist anymore, and reintroduce it to the audience and go, hey, remember phone books? And then there's a whole generation of people that have never seen a phone book, and they're like, what? The people's phone numbers were written on a page? It's kind of this fun moment of brokering the sort of experience of the past as well for new people to do. And I find, when I was doing 1963 as well, it's difficult if you look at 1963 in just, this the umbrella was set in Dallas and in Texas in 1963. Right. It's still 1945, really. Because that the infrastructure, the sort of the style of things didn't really evolve as quickly as we did now, as we do now. We kind of remake our environments quite quickly now. So from that point of view, I just realized there was a color palette, like you mentioned with the streetcar, and that there's a color palette from that era that just kind of resonates for people in terms of turquoise and coral and different colors, so you just try to sort of create that immediate color impression, but then you still had to kind of sometimes move the dial on history a bit, just to for the people that really aren't that dialed into how things changed, and steal a little bit from the late 60s, the summer of love, just to remind everybody that, we're still in the 60s, because it does look a lot like the 50s. If you're on a project that's really trying to have that level of authenticity. So oftentimes graphics is the way to get there. We make our wallpapers, or we do posters, or we do things of signs and fonts, and those types of things really teleport people back into the time.
Well, whoever made the Wayne and Schuster lunchbox, I want one. It was fantastic. It looks so authentic. And you're right. If you're doing a show in 63 in Dallas in November, there shouldn't be a lot of 63 Chevys driving around. You should see Finns, right? You should see cars from the 1957, 58, because
people would have their cars for decades back then. You could fix them back then, right? And
that's right.
Them and
there you go. Mark, listen, you've been very generous with your time. I just want to wrap up with 3 questions. One of them, the first one is, what are you watching now? Are you streaming something interesting right at the moment?
Well, I just got into I'm usually behind, but I just got into Fargo, which is the 5th season right now.
Yeah.
Which
you worked on Kids in the Hall, so you've got one of the colleagues.
I've seen, I did see
Dave Foley.
Sorry, it's I'm terrible with names again today.
Dave Foley.
Yes, Dave Foley's got a great part in that.
Yeah.
And actually, I've worked, on different projects over the years. And I think Mark McKinney did an appearance on Critch, I think.
Yes, he did as a magician.
Season before I was there.
Yeah.
I've had the pleasure of kind of crossing paths with all of the kids at different times and different moments on projects over the years.
Did you work on Dave Foley's The Secret Message of Christmas special, or whatever it was called? It was 20 years ago, Mark. It's probably before you're into it. But he It's a very funny show that was only shown once. They didn't have the rights cleared beyond that. It's a funny story, but anyway.
Oh yeah, there's a whole other podcast about those kinds of things.
Oh
but,
yeah.
But yeah, when watching Fargo is sort of my new thing. I'm kind of trying to avoid binging because I have other things to do. Running out of time with Christmas coming, but I'm sure
I know.
A couple more episodes on tonight.
No kidding. What was the show that you just ran home from school to see, or just fascinated you as a youngster?
Well, I mean, youngster-wise, I mean, I was thinking about that question today, and I mean, there was a moment in the 80s when I think Miami Vice broke, and that, I think for me, that was like a moment where I actually really paid attention to the TV schedule, because I really wanted to see this show, which was just so, was kind of swept up in the whole, much music, video music explosion, like music on TV, and it really got me kind of into a sort of an obsession with the schedule and when is it on, and we don't have a VCR. I got to get home, get out of my way. I'm coming home for that. When I was younger, I mean, TV for a certain generation of people, for me, was always kind of this sort of pastiche of reruns of shows from decades prior, and when the new stuff would come on, we lived in Ottawa, so I don't think we got the cable thing till the 80s. So, it was like, where is it on the dial? It was hard to kind of get really loyal to stuff. I think you ended up just kind of defaulting to what was on after school, like Gilligan's Island. What was on during the Sunday afternoon was Star Trek usually showed up some point, because it was just, so you just kind of were passively, had all this stuff thrown at you, and which I think is interesting because it certainly broadens your frame of reference in terms of just understanding the stories that are being told and retold now. Yeah. Having had that kind of sort of passive blanket, there's 8 channels and it's not your turn. You're going to have to watch what whoever else is watching TV.
So, in some ways, a golden time, especially if you're a TV critic.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, finally, and I might have a hint at what you're going to choose, but do you have an all-time favorite TV theme song?
Oh, again, it's sort of funny. It's like I don't consciously have it, but there's this sort of jukebox in my head that sort of just spews out random sound bites, and often, and it's not the Miami Vice's theme. Okay. It's actually, I tried to pinpoint it. I had to look it up. I think remember that show Simon and Simon?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
There was like a Magnum PI Simon and Simon rerun duo on the channel in my house that I could somehow obtain the right time to watch. So the Simon and Simon theme song, that sort of steel guitar twangy thing, just kind of often is just drifting around in my head. And sometimes the A-Team theme song kind of pops in when I ought to do something in a hurry.
You love it when a plan comes together, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That is awesome. I'm trying to think I get these confused. Simon and Simon, the Rockford Files, Magnum, all those action cop shows.
Those buddy detective action, Simon and Simon were brothers or something. One was like a city guy, one was a country guy. And
that's awesome. Well, great choice. Well, listen, Mark, it's been great talking to you. Thank you very much for your time today. All the best for Christmas and the holidays, and continued success in your field. It's very impressive. I love watching Son of a Critch. And it's just, great writing, great acting, but it looks amazing. It sets me back in that time, and that's a lot of that is to your credit. So I'm really looking forward to seeing this special episode in January with the nod to Star Trek. So congrats on everything.
Well, I appreciate that. And I just want to shout out to Liz Bischoff, who was the production designer for the first 2 seasons. And she really set the bar for me to help, bring season 3 to life as well. So it's definitely a hybrid. I've contributed some new stuff this season. But overall, for me, being part of a project like Critch was really gratifying because it is so, it's so lovingly crafted by all the people involved. And I think Mark Critch is an amazing talent. So it was really, really wonderful to be part of his world that he's created.
Did you get a chance to talk to Malcolm McDowell?
Yes, I did, actually. We hung out a bit. We went and saw Oppenheimer together at the Mall on a Sunday afternoon. And with Mark and our first AD, Dan Murphy, and we actually also got a chance to have a little sneak peek at the new Caligula cut that was created.
Really? I didn't know there was a new one.
There is a new one, yeah. Apparently, I think it dropped in a festival somewhere in California back in November.
Is Malcolm in it?
Oh yeah.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, this just tells you how on a little loop I am. That is great. Well,
yeah. I mean, it was one of the more surreal moments for me in my relationship with my far-flung relationship with Hollywood. But Malcolm is a wonderful dude. I mean, he was just a really nice guy to hang out with, and he was very generous and invited us up for an evening of snacks and screened his screener, and we all had a fun time. And he's a very very sweet guy.
Yeah, I had the great privilege. Mark set up an interview, and I did a podcast with Malcolm. And my God, you could do 25 podcasts with Malcolm. He has so many stories, right?
Oh, he's got great stories.
Yeah. Well, this has been great, Mark. I really appreciate it. And best of the season again, and congrats on everything. Thanks as always to Phil Hong, who produced this episode with warp speed. Thanks to Mark Critch for suggesting the interview with Mark, and to Brianna Hurley at the Taro Group for setting things up. Thanks as well to BJ Del Conte and the Crispy Critters, along with Stephen Dudley, for the music recorded years ago for a short little film called Varsity Blues. That's the stuff you hear on this here podcast. Finally, thanks to you, listener. If you enjoy this episodes, please favor us with a like or a review. I am Bill Brio. Thank you for listening.